Warning: the following video contains graphic content that may be disturbing to some viewers. Discretion is advised.
For Murder, Episode 4. The Duluth Lynchings. Here's what happened. On June 15, 1920, three African-American circus workers, Elias Clayton, Elmer Jackson, and Isaac McGhie, suspects in an assault case, were taken from jail and lynched by a white mob of thousands in Duluth, Minnesota. Rumors had circulated that 6 African-Americans had raped and robbed a 19-year-old woman. A physician who examined her found no physical evidence of rape. On June 14, 1920, the John Robinson Circus arrived in Duluth for a free parade and a one-night performance. 2 local white teenagers, Irene Tuscan, age 19, and James Jimmy Sullivan, 18, met at the circus and ended up behind the big top, watching the black workers dismantle the menagerie tent, load wagons, and generally get the circus ready to move on. It is unknown what took place between Tuscan, Sullivan, and the workers. Later that night, Sullivan claimed to his father that he and Tuscan were assaulted and that Tuscan was raped and robbed by 5 or 6 black circus workers who were part of the crew. In the early morning of June 15, Duluth Police Chief John Murphy received a call from James Sullivan's father saying 6 black circus workers had held his son and girlfriend at gunpoint and then raped and robbed Irene Tuscan. Chief Murphy lined up all 150 or so roustabouts, food service workers, and props men on the side of the tracks and asked Sullivan and Tuscan to identify their attackers. The police arrested 6 black men as suspects in connection with the rape and robbery and held them in custody in the city jail. Sullivan's claim that Tuscan was raped has been questioned. When she was examined by her physician, Dr. David Graham, on the morning of June 15, he found no physical evidence of rape or assault. Newspapers printed articles about the alleged rape. Rumors spread in the white community about it, including that Tuscan was dying from her injuries. That evening, a mob of between 1,000 and 10,000 men formed outside the Duluth City Jail. The Duluth Commissioner of Public Safety, William F. Murnian, ordered the police not to use their guns to protect the prisoners. The mob used heavy timbers, bricks, and rails to break down doors and windows, pulling the 6 black men from their cells. The mob seized Elias Clayton, Elmer Jackson, and Isaac McGhie. They took them out and convicted them of Tuscan's rape in a kangaroo court. The mob took the 3 men 1 block to the intersection 1st Street and 2nd Avenue East, where they beat them and hanged them from a light pole. The next day, the Minnesota National Guard arrived at Duluth to secure the area and to guard the surviving prisoners, as well as 10 additional black suspects whom the police had arrested from the circus at its next stop. They were moved under heavy guard to the jail of St. Louis County. The killings made headlines throughout the country. The Chicago Evening Post wrote, "This is a crime of a northern state, as black and ugly as any that has brought the South in disrepute. The Duluth authorities stand condemned in the eyes of the nation." An article in the Minneapolis Journal accused the lynch mob of putting a stain on the name of Minnesota, stating, "The sudden flaming up of racial passion, which is the reproach of the South, may also occur, as we now learn in the bitterness of humiliation, in Minnesota." The June 15 Eli Miner reported that just across the bay in Superior, Wisconsin, the acting chief of police declared, "We are going to run all idle Negroes out of Superior, and they're going to stay out." How many were forced out is not certain. All of the blacks employed by a carnival in Superior were fired and told to leave the city. Prominent blacks in Duluth complained that the city had not protected the circus workers. The mayor, commissioner of public safety and police chief were criticized for their failures to break up the mob before it had gotten so powerful. A special grand jury was called to investigate the lynchings. It said that Murnian was not competent and the police department was in need of a thorough overhauling. 2 days later, on June 17, Judge William Cant and the grand jury had a difficult time identifying the lead mob members. In the end, the grand jury issued 37 indictments for the lynching mob. 25 were for rioting and 12 for the crime of murder in the first degree. Some men were indicted on both charges. 3 men. Louis Dondino, Carl Hammerberg, and Gilbert Stevenson were convicted of rioting. None served more than 15 months in prison. No one was prosecuted for the murders of the 3 black men. Prosecution continued against the other black circus workers. Despite the lack of significant physical evidence, 7 men were indicted for rape. The NAACP had protested to the city about the lynchings. It hired defense attorneys for the men, and charges were dismissed for 5. Max Mason and William Miller were tried for rape. Miller was acquitted, but Mason was convicted and sentenced to serve 7 to 30 years in prison. He was a native of Decatur, Georgia, who had been traveling with the circus as a worker. He appealed his case without success. He was incarcerated at Stillwater State Prison, serving 4 years, from 1921 to 1925. He was released on the condition that he would leave the state. William T. Francis, associate counsel for Max Mason, was an attorney from St. Paul. He and his wife Nillie Francis continued to work after the trial on anti-lynching legislation, which the state of Minnesota passed in April 1921. The law provided for compensation of relatives of victims and suspended police officials who failed to protect prisoners from mobs. No lynchings have since taken place in the state. The anti-lynching law was repealed in Minnesota in 1984. However, the 1968 Civil Rights Act ensured that hate crimes based on race could be prosecuted at the federal level. Minnesota also has a hate crime law which ensures cooperation with the federal government to prosecute those who committed hate crimes defined in the 1968 Civil Rights Act as well. Residents of Duluth began to work on ways to commemorate the victims of the lynching. The Clayton Jackson McGhie Scholarship Committee set up a fund in 2000 and awarded its first scholarship in 2005. On October 10, 2003, a plaza and statues were dedicated in Duluth to the 3 men who were killed. The bronze statues are part of a memorial across the street from the site of the lynchings. The Clayton Jackson McGhie Memorial was designed and sculpted by Carla J. Stetson in collaboration with editor and writer Anthony Payton Porter. At the memorial's opening, thousands of citizens of Duluth and surrounding communities gathered for a ceremony. The final speaker at the ceremony was Warren Reed, the great-grandson of one of the most prominent leaders of the lynch mob. Warren Reed stated, "It was a long-held family secret, and its deeply buried shame was brought to the surface and unraveled. We will never know the destinies and legacies these men would have chosen for themselves if they had been allowed to make that choice. But I know this. Their existence, however brief and cruelly interrupted, is forever woven into the fabric of my own life. My son will continue to be raised in an environment of tolerance, understanding and humility, now with even more pertinence than before." Reed has written a memoir exploring his learning about his great-grandfather's role in the lynching, as well his decision to find and connect with the descendants of Elmer Jackson, one of the men killed that night. On June 15, 2020, the 100th anniversary of the lynchings, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz visited the memorial and issued a proclamation recognizing the day as Elias Clayton, Elmer Jackson, and Isaac McGhie Commemoration Day. In his proclamation, Walz stated, "The foundational principles of our state and nation were horrifically and inexcusably violated on June 15, 1920, when Elias Clayton, Elmer Jackson, and Isaac McGhie, 3 black men, were wrongfully accused of a crime, and we must not allow such communal atrocities to happen again. Everyone must be aware of this tragic history." He compared the lynchings to the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis 3 weeks before. In 2020, during the George Floyd protests, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison proposed that the related 1920 conviction of Max Mason, a black man convicted of raping an 18-year-old woman, was a false charge and should be reversed. On June 12, 2020, the Minnesota Board of Pardons granted Max Mason the first posthumous pardon in the history of the state of Minnesota. In 1920, Mason, who was working in the same traveling circus as the other 3 who were lynched, was convicted of rape and sentenced to 30 years in prison. He was released from prison in 1925 on the condition that he not return to Minnesota for 16 years. Thanks for watching True Murder. Please like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you'll never miss a new episode.